Disclaimer: this is a fictional dramatization created for artistic, emotional, and educational storytelling purposes. All characters and events are entirely fictional and created using AI tools. No impersonation, misrepresentation, or harm is intended. The content contains scenes of danger involving child characters. However, no real persons or minors were involved in its production. Grace's Love Stories produces scripted, AI-generated stories that promote, entertain, inspire kindness, and emotional connection. We respect our viewers and strictly adhere to YouTube's policies.
The scent of rain-soaked earth and old stone filled Irena's senses, a damp chill that had nothing to do with the weather. It was the smell of judgment. The great hall of the Northern Fang Pack was designed to intimidate, with its high, smoke-blackened rafters and the snarling wolf heads carved into the throne. But today, the intimidation was not just in the architecture. It was etched on every face turned toward her. They looked at her as if she were something unclean, a blight upon their proud, strong pack. Irenia stood alone in the center of the hall, her simple linen dress doing little to ward off the cold that seeped from the flagstones. She was an Omega, the lowest rank, but even among Omegas, she was a failure. She was wolfless. While every other member of her pack could shift, could feel the wild spirit of their inner beast, Irenia had only a profound emptiness where her wolf should have been. It made her a pariah, a broken thing. Her father, Alpha Dravenor, stood with the pack elders, his face a mask of granite and shame. He would not meet her eyes. Beside him, her sister Kerith looked on with a mixture of pity and frustration. Kerith was everything Irenia was not, a powerful alpha female, destined for a great match, her wolf a magnificent silver beast renowned for its speed. Kerith was the family's pride. Irenia was its secret, agonizing disgrace. "The accusation is grave," Elder Valoris's voice boomed, echoing in the cavernous space. "Lord Morvathus of the Shadow Creek Pack claims this Omega, Irenia, used dark influence to blight his lands. He claims her unnatural stillness is a sign of witchcraft, a curse upon the soil that has sickened his pack's livestock." A murmur rippled through the assembled wolves. Witchcraft. The word was a death sentence. Irenia's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. It was not witchcraft. It was just her. She had a strange ability, a quietness of spirit that could sometimes soothe the agitation in animals, and even, on rare occasions, the simmering aggression in other wolves. She had been near Morvathus's lands, gathering herbs, and had calmed a panicked flock of his sheep. She had thought she was helping. Instead, she had been condemned. Lord Morvathus, a wiry wolf with eyes too close together and a perpetual sneer, stepped forward. "She is a void, a vacuum where a wolf should be. Nature abhors a vacuum. What dark power has filled that space? I demand justice. I demand her life." No one spoke for her. Not her father. Not her sister. They were all too afraid of the stain she would leave upon them. She was a broken Omega, easily sacrificed for political expediency. Morvathus was a troublesome lord, and giving him her life would appease him. She closed her eyes, a single tear tracing a cold path down her cheek. She was utterly, completely alone. Just as Elder Valoris was about to pronounce the verdict that would seal her fate, the great oak doors of the hall groaned open. The sound was so loud, so final, it cut through the tense silence like a blade. Every head turned. Irenia's heart stopped. Framed in the doorway, silhouetted against the stormy gray light, was a figure of immense size and power. The air in the hall grew thick, heavy with an oppressive aura that made the hairs on Irenia's arms stand on end. The scent of ozone, pine, and ancient, untamable power washed over them. Even the snarling fire in the hearth seemed to shrink back. The Alpha King had arrived. King Cailorin was a legend, a nightmare whispered to frighten pups. He ruled all the packs with an iron fist from his remote, craggy fortress in the mountains. He was said to be more beast than man, his rage a physical force that could break alphas. He had not been seen in the northern Fang territories for over a decade. He moved into the hall with a predator's grace that belied his size. His hair was as black as a raven's wing, and his eyes were a startling glacial blue, filled with a chilling emptiness. A jagged scar ran from his temple down his cheek, a pale line against his tanned skin. Every wolf in the room, from the strongest alpha to the lowest omega, bowed their head in submission. All except Irenia. She was too frozen by terror to move. His cold gaze swept the room, missing nothing, before it landed on her. For a moment the world narrowed to the space between them. She felt his eyes on her like a physical touch, and a strange jolt. Not of fear, but of something else shot through her. It was a flicker of recognition in the deepest part of her soul, the part she thought was empty. "What is the meaning of this gathering?" His voice was a low rumble, like stones grinding together deep within the earth. It was not loud, but it commanded absolute attention. Lord Morvethys, though visibly unnerved, puffed out his chest. "Your Majesty, we are holding a trial. This creature," he gestured to Irenia with contempt, "is a witch. She has blighted my lands." King Cailorin's eyes remained on Irenia. He took another step forward, his presence so overwhelming that she felt the urge to drop to her knees. But she held his gaze, her terror warring with a spark of defiance she did not know she possessed. She would not die cowering. King Cailorin's focus was absolute, fixed on the small, trembling female in the center of the hall. The air around him was a tempest of raw, barely controlled power. His wolf, his constant tormentor, clawed at the inside of his skin, a raging inferno of pain and fury that never ceased. It was a curse, one he had borne in isolation for years. The agony made him cold, brutal, and distant. It was the only way to keep the beast from consuming him entirely. Yet, as he drew closer to the accused Omega, something impossible happened. A breath of cool, clean air in the heart of his personal hurricane. The screaming inferno inside him did not vanish, but it quieted. The razor-sharp edges of his pain seemed to dull, just for a second. It was the first moment of respite he had felt in a decade. He stopped a mere arm's length from her. She smelled of rain, herbs, and a heartbreaking innocence. She was terrified. He could feel the frantic beat of her pulse. But she did not look away. Her eyes, the color of warm honey, held his, and in their depths, he saw not malice, but a profound and sorrowful strength. He felt the pull again, that strange, inexplicable soothing effect she had on his curse. His wolf, which fought every command, which snarled at every living thing, grew quiet, watchful, curious. It was an unprecedented sensation. "Witchcraft," Cailorin repeated, his voice dangerously soft. He turned his glacial gaze on Morvethys, and the Lesser Lord flinched as if struck. "You accuse her of witchcraft because your sheep were frightened?" "They were unnaturally calm, Your Majesty, and my lands." Morvethys stammered, his bravado crumbling under the king's scrutiny. Cailorin dismissed him with a flick of his wrist. His attention returned to Irenia. Who was this girl? This broken Omega who possessed no wolf, yet could quell the monstrous one chained within his own soul? He could not let her be killed. He could not let her go. He needed to understand this phenomenon. He needed more of this peace. The verdict is not for this pack to decide, Caloran declared, his voice ringing with absolute authority. The hall was so silent one could hear a pin drop. I will take the accused with me to my fortress. I will study this alleged dark influence myself. A collective gasp went through the hall. Irenia's father looked horrified. Kareth's eyes were wide with shock. To be taken by the Alpha King was a fate worse than death in the minds of most. It meant disappearing into the mists of his cursed mountain, never to be seen again. Irenia stared at him, her mind reeling. He was not saving her. He was merely choosing a different, more terrifying way for her to die. Without another word, Caloran gestured to his guards. They moved to flank her, their presence a cage of muscle and steel. He turned and strode from the hall, not looking back, confident that his command would be obeyed. As she was led out, a prisoner of the king, Irenia caught her father's eye one last time. He looked away, his shame a final brutal blow. She was no longer his problem. She was the Alpha King's. The journey to the king's fortress was a blur of fear and motion. Irenia was placed in a covered carriage, the king himself riding ahead with his personal guard. They moved at a punishing pace, the jagged peaks of the Dragon's Tooth Mountains growing larger and more menacing with every hour. The air grew thinner, colder. This was a land that did not welcome life. When they finally arrived, the sight of the fortress stole what little breath Irenia had left. It was not a castle. It was a fang of granite jutting from the mountainside, more prison than palace. Towers clawed at the perpetually gray sky, and a single, narrow bridge over a bottomless chasm was its only entrance. The stories were true. It was a place of isolation, a fortress built to keep the world out, and perhaps to keep a monster in. She was escorted through massive iron-bound doors and into a world of stone and shadow. The air inside was still and cold, heavy with the scent of old magic and a loneliness so profound it felt like a physical weight. Unlike the boisterous halls of her home pack, this place was silent. The few guards and servants she saw moved like ghosts, their heads bowed, their eyes averted. They feared their king. Irenia was led up a winding staircase to a wing of the fortress that was clearly the king's private domain. The guard who led her, a grim-faced man with the silver wolf insignia of the royal guard, stopped before a heavy wooden door. "The king has ordered you confined to these chambers," the guard said, his voice devoid of emotion. "You will be provided for. You are not to leave without his express permission." He unlocked the door and gestured for her to enter. With a heart full of dread, she stepped inside. The door boomed shut behind her, the sound of the lock turning echoing the finality of her imprisonment. The room was surprisingly civilized. It was a suite, not a cell. A large bed with heavy fur blankets dominated one wall, and a fire was already crackling in a stone hearth. There were bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes, a small table and chairs, and a large, arched window that looked out not at the chasm, but at a starkly beautiful panorama of snow-dusted peaks. It was a gilded cage, but a cage nonetheless. She was his prisoner, a specimen to be studied. She walked to the window, pressing her hand against the cold glass. She was so high up, it felt like she was at the top of the world, and yet she had never been more trapped. What did he want from her? What study did he intend to conduct? The fear that had been her constant companion for days twisted into a new, sharper shape. The fear of the unknown. The fear of him. For 3 days, Irenia saw no one but a silent servant who brought her meals and stoked her fire. The woman never spoke, never met her eyes. The isolation was a crushing weight. Irenia paced the length of her chambers, her thoughts a frantic whirlwind. She explored the bookshelves, running her fingers over the spines of books on history, strategy, and ancient lore. It seemed a strange library for a man reputed to be a mindless beast. On the evening of the third day, the door opened without warning. The Alpha King stood there, filling the frame. He had changed from his traveling leathers into a simple black tunic and trousers. Without his armor, he looked less like a king and more like a hunter. The raw power emanating from him was just as potent, if not more so. He said nothing, simply walked into the room. His glacial blue eyes scanned her, and she felt that now familiar jolt deep within her. The air around him crackled with a tension that made her skin prickle. He looked unwell. There was a tightness around his mouth and a faint sheen of sweat on his brow, despite the chill in the room. "Are you comfortable?" he asked, his voice a low rasp. The question was so unexpected, so mundane, that she could only nod, her throat too tight to speak. He walked over to the fire, staring into the flames. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Irena's heart pounded. She could feel the storm inside him, a chaotic energy that vibrated in the very air. It was a mirror of the agony she had sensed from him in the great hall, but magnified 100 times. It was a miracle he was even standing. Without thinking, driven by an instinct she did not understand, she took a hesitant step toward him. "My lord, are you all right?" His head snapped toward her, his eyes flashing with a dangerous light. "Do not ask me that." The words were a snarl, a warning. "You are here for one reason, to be observed." But the closer she moved, the more she felt his pain. It was a living thing, a poisoned wolf clawing its way out of him. And her strange emptiness, her brokenness, seemed to call to it. It was like a void that wanted to draw the poison in, to neutralize it. He flinched, taking a step back from her as if she had burned him. A look of stunned disbelief crossed his features. His breathing, which had been harsh and ragged, evened out slightly. The violent tremor in his hands lessened. "What are you?" he whispered, more to himself than to her. Irenia stood frozen, her hand half extended. She had done nothing but step closer, yet something had happened. She had touched his pain without laying a finger on him, and in that moment, she understood. Her brokenness wasn't an absence of a wolf. It was something else entirely. And it was the one thing in the world that this terrifying, powerful king seemed to need. Kaloran watched her, his mind a battlefield. The relief her presence brought was undeniable, a cool balm on a festering wound. For a decade he had lived with the constant, agonizing roar of his cursed wolf. Now, in her proximity, it was a sullen growl. The change was so profound it was terrifying. It made him vulnerable. It made him dependent on this Omega. He fought the urge to pull her closer, to wrap himself in the quiet she projected and let the pain wash away. That path led to weakness. He was a king. He could not afford to be weak. "I will have books sent to you," he said abruptly, his tone harsh to cover the tremor of need in his voice. "Ones detailing the ancient lines and the magic of the first wolves. You will read them. You will tell me if you find anything that explains you." He turned and left as quickly as he had come, slamming the door behind him. He leaned against the cold stone of the hallway, his breathing ragged. He had to keep his distance. He had to understand this rationally, clinically. She was a puzzle to be solved, not a comfort to be sought. Inside the room, Irenia was left trembling, not with fear, but with a dizzying sense of purpose. He was in pain, a deep, terrible pain that he hid behind a wall of ice and fury. And she, the wolfless broken Omega, could soothe it. The thought was both frightening and exhilarating. For the first time in her life, her perceived flaw felt like a strength. True to his word, the next day a stack of heavy, ancient-looking books was delivered to her room. She dove into them with a hunger she had never known. The texts were dense, speaking of a time when the lines between wolf and human were more fluid, of rare gifts that had been bred out or forgotten over centuries of prioritizing brute strength. She read about empaths, those who could feel the emotions of others, and nulls, those who could suppress the magic of others. But none of it quite fit. Her ability was not just feeling or suppressing, it was harmonizing. It was as if her spirit, lacking a wolf of its own, could reach out and quiet the storms in others. Days turned into a week. Kaylorin visited her chamber every evening. He never stayed long. He would stand by the fire, asking her curt questions about her reading. They never touched. They barely spoke of anything personal. But each time he came, Irenia could feel the desperate, clawing agony within him recede, just for a little while. And each time he left, the silence he left behind felt a little emptier. She began to see past the terrifying king. She saw the deep exhaustion in his eyes, the subtle lines of pain etched around his mouth. She saw a man living in a private hell, and her heart, which she had thought long dead to anything but fear, began to ache for him. This was no longer about her survival. It was about his. The fragile routine they had established was shattered by the arrival of a delegation from the capital. Irenia heard the commotion from her window, the sound of many horses and the formal call of the sentries. A short while later, the silent servant who brought her meals seemed agitated, her movements jerky. That evening, Kaylorin did not come, nor the next. On the third night, Irenia was pacing her room, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. She missed his presence. The thought struck her with the force of a physical blow. She, a prisoner, missed her captor. But it was not the king she missed. It was the tormented man she had begun to see, and the strange sense of purpose she felt in his company. The door finally opened, but it was not Kaylorin. It was the grim-faced guard, Ardenor. He was the king's beta, his second in command, a man whose loyalty was etched into every line of his weathered face. "The king requires your presence," he said, his tone clipped. Fear, cold and familiar, washed over her. "Where?" "In his private study. Follow me." Ardenor led her through a different set of corridors, deeper into the king's domain. They stopped before a set of carved oak doors. Ardenor knocked once, then opened it for her. The study was a large circular room, lined from floor to ceiling with books. A massive desk was littered with maps and scrolls. Kaylorin stood staring out a vast window that overlooked the chasm. But he was not alone. Standing near the desk was Lord Morvethys. Irenia froze, her blood turning to ice. Morvethys's eyes, small and cruel, lit up with malicious triumph when he saw her. "Ah, the little witch," Morvethys sneered. "Still alive, I see. His Majesty has been most hospitable." "Morvethys." Kaylorin's voice was a low growl. He did not turn from the window. "You have said your piece. Leave us." "But of course, your Majesty," Morvethys said with a mock bow. "I only came to deliver the Council's formal proposal. An alliance with the Sunstone Pack is vital, and Lady Valora is a most suitable match. A strong alpha female for a strong king. It will stabilize the kingdom. It will produce strong heirs." Every word was a poison dart aimed at Irenia. A suitable match. A strong alpha. Strong heirs. Everything she was not. Morvethys shot her one last venomous look before sweeping out of the room. The door clicked shut, leaving Irenia alone with the king and the suffocating tension in the air. She realized with dawning horror that Morvethus was not just a troublesome lord from a minor pack. He was the king's uncle. And he was here, in the heart of the fortress, weaving his political poison. He was a threat not just to her, but to Cailorin himself. Cailorin finally turned from the window. The agony was back in his eyes, tenfold. The political maneuvering, the presence of his treacherous uncle had clearly agitated his curse. He was struggling to maintain control, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists at his sides. "He wants me to marry," Cailorin stated, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "He has convinced the council it is the only way to quell the unrest in the southern territories." Irenia's heart sank. A political marriage. It made perfect sense. It was how their world worked. Power was consolidated through unions, through the promise of strong, pure-blooded alpha heirs. An alliance with the powerful Sunstone Pack would secure Cailorin's reign in a way his fearsome reputation never could. "Lady Valora is the Alpha's daughter," he continued, his gaze distant. "She is said to be a great warrior. Her wolf is legendary." He was not looking at her, but Irenia felt as if he were listing all of her own deficiencies. She was a wolfless omega. She could offer him no political advantage, no powerful heirs. All she had was this strange, quiet magic that no one, not even she, understood. It was a secret, useless comfort in the face of a kingdom's demands. "You should do it," she whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "It is what a king must do." At that, his head snapped up. His glacial eyes bored into hers, and for the first time, she saw not just pain or coldness, but a flicker of raw, desperate anger. "Is that what you think?" he bit out, taking a step toward her. "That I should chain myself to another, when I am already in chains?" The storm inside him was breaking its leash. The air grew thick, and a low growl, more beast than man, rumbled in his chest. He staggered, clutching his head as a wave of pain washed over him. "Get out!" he snarled, his face contorted in a mask of agony. "Leave! Now!" But Irenia did not move. Seeing him like this, so utterly consumed by his torment, broke through her fear. All she saw was the man she had come to know in the quiet evenings by the fire, the man who hid a universe of pain behind a wall of ice. Ignoring his command, ignoring the primal danger rolling off him in waves, she closed the distance between them. She did not know what she was doing, only that she had to. She reached out her small, trembling hands and gently placed them on his chest. The moment her skin touched the rough fabric of his tunic, it was as if a bolt of lightning shot through them both. For Cailorin, the world of screaming, red-hot agony went silent. Not quiet. Silent. The raging inferno that had been his constant companion for a decade was just gone. Replaced by a profound, echoing peace that was so foreign it was disorienting. He stared down at her small hands pressed against his chest, his heart hammering with a stunned, terrifying hope. For Irenia, it was like plunging her hands into a roaring forge. She felt the full, undiluted force of his curse, the pain, the rage, the despair. It was a torrent of black, chaotic energy. But her own spirit, the calm, empty space where her wolf should have been, did not break. It absorbed the energy, drawing it into itself, neutralizing it like cool water on hot coals. It was overwhelming, but it did not destroy her. She was a conduit, a vessel for this strange, healing quiet. She looked up at him, her honey-colored eyes wide with the effort. She saw the shock on his face, the raw vulnerability of a man who had just been released from a torture chamber. The fearsome Alpha King was gone, and in his place was just Kailorin. How? He breathed, his voice hoarse with disbelief. He covered her hands with his own, pressing them tighter against his chest, terrified the sensation would vanish. Her touch was life. It was sanity. I don't know, she whispered, her voice trembling. It just quiets it. They stood like that for a long moment, locked together in the silent eye of his personal storm. The world outside the study, the political plots, the unwanted fiancés, the weight of a crown, ceased to exist. There was only this impossible connection, this shared miracle. Slowly, tentatively, Kailorin lowered his head until his forehead rested against hers. He breathed in her scent, the scent of herbs and rain and peace, and for the first time since he was a boy, he felt whole. The snarling beast within him was not just quiet, it was content. It recognized her. Mate. The word echoed in the deepest part of his soul, a primal, undeniable truth. It was not a thought, it was an instinct, a fact as real as the stone of his fortress. This small, broken Omega, the wolfless girl sent to him as a pawn, was his fated mate. The one being in the universe created to complete him, to heal him. The irony was so cruel, so perfect, it was almost laughable. His salvation was the one person the world would deem the most unsuitable match imaginable. And his uncle, the man who had orchestrated the curse that nearly destroyed him, was now trying to force him into a union that would tear him away from his only hope. The revelation hung in the air between them, unspoken but utterly tangible. Kailorin raised his head, his blue eyes searching Irenya's face. He saw confusion, exhaustion, but also a dawning awareness. She felt it too, the pull, the rightness of their connection, even if she did not have the word for it. Irenya. He said her name for the first time, the sound soft in the quiet room. The intimacy of it made her shiver. She slowly pulled her hands back, the loss of contact leaving a sudden chill in the air. The full implication of what had just happened, of what it meant, began to settle in. She, an Omega, had a power over the Alpha King, a power that his uncle and his enemies would kill to control or destroy. "My lord, your uncle," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "He cannot know about this." "He will not," Kailorin said, his voice hard as steel. The brief moment of peace was over, replaced by the cold reality of their situation. His gaze sharpened, the strategist, the king, reasserting control. "But he will not stop. He brought the council's proposal here for a reason. He wanted to see my reaction. He is testing my resolve." He paced the room, the caged energy returning, though now it was the energy of a predator planning its hunt, not the thrashing of a wounded beast. "This marriage to Vailora, it's a trap. If I accept, I lose you. If I refuse without a good reason, the council will see it as weakness, as instability. Morvethis will use it to challenge my rule." He stopped in front of her, his expression grim. "He suspects something is wrong with me. He has for years. He was there, the day I was cursed." Irenya's breath hitched. "What happened?" A shadow passed over Kailorin's face, a memory so dark it seemed to chill the room further. It was a border skirmish, a trap laid by rogue sorcerers. Morvethis was with my father's contingent. I was young, reckless. I was struck by a poisoned blade meant for my father. The sorcerers were killed, but the curse took root. It twisted my wolf, turned my own spirit into my jailer. Morvethis has always maintained it was just a random attack, but his ambition is no secret. He has always wanted the throne. The pieces clicked into place for Irenya. Morvethus had not just taken advantage of Caloran's affliction, he may have orchestrated it. And now he was here to finish the job, using political means instead of magical ones. "We cannot let him win," she said, her voice filled with a new, fierce determination. This was no longer just about her. It was about Caloran, about the man she was beginning to realize she cared for more than she could have imagined. "What do we do?" Caloran looked at her, at the fire in her eyes, and a slow, dangerous smile touched his lips. It was the first time she had ever seen him smile. "We give him exactly what he wants, a public spectacle." Caloran's plan was audacious and terrifyingly risky. He announced that he would host a formal reception in the Great Hall of the fortress to officially receive the marriage proposal from the Sunstone Pack's emissaries. Lord Morvethus would be in attendance, as would other key lords of the realm, all summoned to witness the king's decision. "He expects me to either refuse and look weak, or accept and be trapped," Caloran explained to Irenia in the privacy of his study. They had spent hours together, her presence keeping his curse dormant while he laid out his strategy. "Instead, I will create a third option." "And what am I to do?" Irenia asked, her heart fluttering with a mixture of fear and anticipation. "You," Caloran said, his gaze intense, "will be there, by my side." The thought sent a wave of panic through her. To stand in a hall full of powerful alphas, to be seen next to the king, would be to paint a target on her back. "They will see me as a weakness, a disgrace. Morvethus will use it against you." "Let him," Caloran countered, his voice a low rumble. "I am tired of hiding. I am tired of letting this curse dictate my life. He wants to see the beast? Then let him see the one thing that can tame it." On the night of the reception, Irenia's hands trembled as the silent servant helped her into a simple but elegant gown of deep forest green that Caloran had provided. It was more beautiful than anything she had ever owned. Looking at her reflection, she saw not the broken Omega from the Northern Fang Pack, but someone else, someone with a quiet strength in her eyes. Ardenor escorted her to the Great Hall. The cavernous room, usually so cold and empty, was filled with people and lit by hundreds of candles. Banners from the various packs hung from the rafters. The air was thick with the scents of wine, roasting meat, and the clashing egos of powerful wolves. At the far end of the hall, on a raised dais, stood the throne. Caloran was there, dressed in formal black and silver, the crown of the Alpha King on his head. He looked every inch the powerful, unassailable monarch. But Irenia could feel the faint tremor of the beast beneath his skin, agitated by the crowd and the stress. She took a deep breath and started walking. Every eye in the hall turned to her. A wave of whispers followed in her wake. "Who is that? An Omega? What is she doing here?" She saw Lord Morvethus standing near the dais, his face a mask of smug satisfaction that curdled into confusion, then fury, as he saw where she was headed. She did not falter. She kept her eyes fixed on Caloran. He watched her approach, his expression unreadable, but as she drew closer, she felt the familiar pull, the calming of the storm within him. She reached the dais and stopped just before the steps, bowing her head as protocol dictated. Caloran descended the 2 steps, a move that shocked the entire court. A king did not leave his throne. He extended his hand to her. "Irenia," he said, his voice clear and carrying through the now silent hall, "stand with me." She placed her trembling hand in his. His grip was warm and firm. He led her up the steps and had her stand not behind him, not below him, but beside the throne. It was a statement more powerful than any words, a public act of defiance that declared her importance to the entire kingdom. The gasp that swept the room was audible. Morvethus's face was a thundercloud of pure rage. The trap had been sprung, but not on the person he had intended. The emissary from the Sunstone Pack, a stern-faced alpha with a magnificent white wolf pelt draped over his shoulders, stepped forward. He unrolled a scroll and read the formal marriage proposal, his voice ringing with pride. He spoke of alliance, of strength, of the honor of joining their alpha, Lady Valora, to the king. The entire time, his eyes kept flicking nervously from Kaloran to the unknown Omega standing beside the throne. When he was finished, a tense silence fell over the hall. All eyes were on Kaloran. This was the moment of decision. Kaloran looked out over the assembled lords, his gaze sweeping over them before landing on his uncle. Morvethus met his stare with a look of pure venom. "I thank the Sunstone Pack for their generous offer," Kaloran began, his voice calm and controlled. "An alliance with such a noble pack is indeed a worthy goal." Morvethus allowed himself a small, triumphant smile. He thought he had won. "However," Kaloran continued, his voice dropping, gaining a hard, steely edge, "I cannot accept this proposal. For the crown cannot be bound to any alliance that is not first bound by fate." He turned and looked at Irenia. The gesture was intimate, possessive, leaving no room for misinterpretation. The traditions of our ancestors speak not just of strength in battle, but of strength in spirit. They speak of the mate bond as the most sacred foundation of our people, a foundation my line has not known for centuries. He reached out and took Irenia's hand, lacing his fingers through hers. Until now. The shock in the hall was a physical force. Mates? The Alpha King and a wolfless, unknown Omega? It was unthinkable, heretical. Morvethus lunged forward, his face purple with rage. "Lies! This is madness. The boy is unwell. He has been bewitched by this nothing. She has addled his mind. He is unfit to rule." As Morvethus shouted his accusations, he subtly opened his palm. Irenia caught a glimpse of a small dark object clutched within it, a shard of obsidian that pulsed with a malevolent, sickly green light. It was an artifact, humming with the same dark magic she had felt from Kaloran's curse. Morvethus was not just making a political move, he was making his final, violent play. As Morvethus's voice rose to a crescendo, the obsidian shard in his hand flared with a sickening green light. A wave of pure, concentrated malice washed through the hall, aimed directly at Kaloran. Kaloran roared, a sound of pure agony that was not entirely human. He staggered back, clutching his chest. The fragile peace Irenia's presence had given him was shattered. The curse, amplified by the artifact, came rushing back with the force of a tidal wave. His eyes, once a clear glacial blue, began to glow with a terrifying feral red light. His body contorted, the sound of bones grinding and shifting audible even over the panicked screams of the courtiers. "Behold your king!" Morvethus shrieked, his voice filled with manic glee. "A monster! A beast who cannot control his own wolf. He is an abomination. I, Morvethus of the royal blood, challenge his right to the throne." Panic erupted. Lords and ladies scrambled back, tripping over one another in their haste to escape the monstrous transformation happening before them. Guards drew their swords, but they were frozen, unsure whether to defend their king or protect the court from him. Kaloran was on his knees, his body racked with violent spasms. A low, guttural snarl ripped from his throat. He was losing the fight. The beast, enraged and empowered by the dark magic, was about to consume him entirely. He fought it, his gaze fixed on Irenia, a desperate plea in his glowing red eyes. He was trying to protect her, even as he was being ripped apart from the inside. The world seemed to slow down for Irenia. The screams, the chaos, the terror. It all faded into a dull roar. All she saw was Kaloran, her Kaloran, in unbearable pain. The man who had saved her, who had shown her kindness, who had made her feel whole for the first time in her life. Her mate. Fear was a distant memory. In its place was a love so fierce, so protective, it was a physical force. She would not let him be taken from her. She would not let Morvethys win. Ignoring Ardenor's shouted warning to stay back, she ran. She dodged panicked courtiers and terrified guards, her green dress a flash of color in the maelstrom of fear. She did not slow until she reached Kaloran's side. He was barely recognizable, his features shifting, elongating into something bestial. He growled at her, a primal warning, the beast not recognizing her through the haze of cursed rage. She did not flinch. She knelt before him, looking directly into those terrifying, glowing eyes. "Kaloran," she said, her voice clear and steady amidst the chaos. "I am here. I am with you. You are not a monster." She placed her hands on his contorted face, her touch gentle but firm. The torrent of black energy that poured into her was staggering. It was a hurricane of pain and fury that threatened to rip her spirit to shreds. But she held on. She poured all of her love, all of her acceptance, all of the quiet harmony of her soul into him. "I love you," she whispered, the words a sacred vow. "I love your strength, and I love your pain. I love the king, and I love the wolf. I accept all of you. You are my mate." Kaloran felt her words, her touch, like a lifeline in an ocean of fire. Her love was a shield, a cool silver light pushing back against the suffocating darkness of the curse. The snarling beast within him, the one that had been screaming for a decade, paused. It turned its monstrous head and looked, truly looked, at the source of this incredible power. It saw her, the other half of its soul, and the rage began to recede, replaced by a profound, aching recognition. The red glow in Kaloran's eyes flickered, then slowly faded, returning to their normal icy blue. The agonizing shifting of his bones ceased. The guttural snarls softened into ragged human breaths. He collapsed forward. The transformation halted, the curse not just quieted, but broken. The malevolent energy, with no purchase left in his soul, dissipated with a final, defeated hiss. He sagged into Irenia's arms, his full weight resting on her as he trembled with the aftershocks. He was exhausted, but he was free. For the first time since he was a young man, his mind was clear. His wolf was calm, a steady, warm presence within him, no longer a tormentor but a partner. He was whole. He looked up at Irenia, his heart overflowing with a love so immense it left him breathless. She had done the impossible. She had faced down the monster and saved the man. Her soft power, the quiet magic the world had scorned, was the strongest force he had ever encountered. The hall was still in stunned silence. Everyone had witnessed it. They had seen their king on the verge of becoming a monster, and they had seen this small Omega girl bring him back with nothing but her touch and her words. Kaloran slowly, painfully got to his feet, pulling Irenia up with him. He kept her hand locked in his, a silent declaration to the entire court. He turned his gaze, now cold and clear as a winter sky, upon his uncle. Morvethys was staring, his face a mask of horrified disbelief. The obsidian shard had fallen from his hand, now just a dull, lifeless piece of rock. His plan had not just failed, it had backfired spectacularly. He had tried to expose a monster, and in doing so, had revealed a miracle. Ardenor! Kaloran's voice rang with renewed power and authority. There was no trace of pain, no hint of the beast. There was only the king. Seize Lord Morvethus, treason, attempted regicide, and the use of forbidden magic. Take him to the dungeons. Morvethus sputtered, his eyes darting around for allies, but he found none. Every lord and lady in the room was staring at Kaloran and Irenia with a mixture of awe and terror. They had just witnessed the truth. The king was not cursed. He was fated. And his mate, the wolfless Omega, was his salvation. As the royal guard dragged the screaming, protesting Morvethus from the hall, Kaloran turned to his court. He pulled Irenia closer, wrapping a protective arm around her. "You have all borne witness tonight," he declared, his voice echoing in the vast hall. "You have seen the truth of the old ways. You have seen the power of a true mate bond. This is Irenia, my mate, my queen. She is the heart of this kingdom and the strength of your king. Any who show her disrespect, show it to me." He leaned down and kissed her, a full public kiss that sealed their bond in front of the entire world. It was not a kiss of passion, but of reverence. A king honoring his savior, a wolf honoring his mate. The kingdom had not been broken tonight. It had been reborn. In the aftermath of the reception, the fortress was abuzz with a new kind of energy. The fear that had once permeated its stone walls was replaced by a sense of wonder and reverence. The silent servants now looked at Irenia with awe, bowing their heads in genuine respect. The guards, led by a deeply humbled Ardenor, treated her as their Luna Queen. Kaloran did not leave her side. The constant grinding pain he had lived with for so long was gone, and in its place was a quiet joy that he found utterly intoxicating. He found himself watching her, memorizing the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the soft smile that touched her lips when she read, the warmth in her honey-colored eyes. He had been living in a black and white world of duty and pain, and she had brought color back into it. They spent the next day in his study, not with ancient tomes, but simply talking. He told her about his childhood before the curse, of his love for his father and his passion for history. She, in turn, told him of her lonely upbringing, of the constant feeling of being less than, of the secret shame of her wolflessness. "It was never a void, Irenia," Kaloran told her, taking her hand. His touch was warm, gentle. It was just space for a different kind of strength to grow. A strength my kingdom needs more than 1,000 alpha warriors. His words were a balm on wounds she had carried her entire life. To be seen, to be truly seen and valued for who she was a more profound healing than even the one she had given him. Late that afternoon, a messenger arrived with a letter bearing the seal of the Northern Fang Pack. Irenia's heart clenched with a familiar anxiety. Kaloran watched her face, his expression concerned. "It is from my father," she said, her voice small. "Read it," he encouraged gently. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal. The letter was short. Her father, Alpha Dravenor, and her sister, Kareth, had ridden to the fortress and humbly requested an audience. They were waiting at the gate. A part of her wanted to refuse, to shut the door on the family that had so easily cast her aside. But another, stronger part, the part that Kaloran had helped her find, knew she had to face them. Not as the broken Omega, but as the woman she had become. "Let them in," she said to Kaloran, her voice steady. He nodded, his eyes filled with pride, and gave the order. She would face her past, but this time she would not be alone. Irenia met them not in the intimidating Great Hall, but in a smaller sunlit solarium filled with hardy mountain plants. She wanted to meet them on her own terms. She stood by a window, bathed in the pale light, feeling calm and centered. Her father and sister were shown in. They looked diminished in the vastness of the king's fortress. Dravener's broad shoulders were slumped, his face etched with a deep, weary regret. Carith, usually so proud and confident, looked pale and uncertain. She could not meet Irenea's eyes. "Irenia," her father began, his voice rough with emotion. We heard what happened. The whole kingdom is talking about it." "I am sure they are," Irenia replied, her tone even. There was no anger, only a quiet sadness for what they had lost. It was Carith who broke. Tears streamed down her face, and she took a stumbling step forward. "We were wrong, Irenia. I was wrong. I was so caught up in what our pack values, strength, power, a strong wolf, that I couldn't see the strength you had all along. I was jealous of your quiet spirit, so I called it weakness. When Morvethus accused you, I was a coward. I let my fear for our family's standing outweigh my love for my sister. Can you ever forgive me?" Her father nodded, his own eyes glistening. "She speaks the truth. I failed you, my daughter, as an alpha and as a father. I let my pride and my shame blind me. I will carry that disgrace for the rest of my days. We do not come here to ask for anything, only to offer our apology and to see that you are well." Irenia looked at her family, at their genuine remorse, and felt the last vestiges of her childhood pain begin to dissolve. Holding on to bitterness would only poison her own happiness. "I am more than well," she said softly. "I am home." She glanced toward the doorway where Caelorin had been standing, giving her the space to face them alone. He stepped into the room, his presence a solid, comforting anchor at her back. He moved to her side, placing a gentle hand on her waist. Dravenor and Carith immediately dropped into a deep bow, their awe and fear of the king palpable. "Rise," Caelorin said, his voice softer than they could have imagined. "Your daughter is the savior of this kingdom. You should be proud." He looked at Irenia, his love for her shining in his eyes. "I know I am." In that moment, the fractured pieces of Irenia's past finally settled into place. She had found her power, her purpose, and her mate, and she had found it in herself to forgive. The future was an open, sunlit path before them. With the threat of Morvethus neutralized and the truth of Irenia's power revealed, Caelorin moved quickly to solidify their union. It was not just a matter of the heart. It was a political necessity. The kingdom needed to see its new foundation made unshakable. He called for the oldest ritual, the one that predated pacts and political alliances, the mating mark. It was an intimate ceremony, to be conducted under the light of the full moon on the highest balcony of the fortress, witnessed only by the spirits of their ancestors. Irenia felt a thrill of nervous excitement as she prepared. This was the final, irrevocable step. The mark would bind their souls, their life forces for eternity. It was a symbol of absolute trust and devotion. That night, the moon was a perfect, luminous silver disk in the clear mountain sky. Caelorin led her onto the balcony. The air was crisp and cold, but she felt nothing but warmth beside him. He was dressed in simple black, she in a gown of moonlight silver. He turned to her, his glacial blue eyes dark with emotion. "Irenia, my mate, my salvation. With this mark I pledge my life, my soul, and my wolf to you. I am yours, completely and forever." "And I am yours," she whispered, her heart overflowing. "I pledge my strength, my spirit, and my heart to you. I am yours, now and for all time." He lowered his head, his touch gentle as he brushed the hair from her neck. She tilted her head, baring the delicate skin over her pulse point. She felt the brief, sharp pressure of his fangs, a sting of pain that was instantly replaced by a wave of pure bliss. A golden, magical energy flooded her senses, warm and vibrant. It felt like the sun rising inside her soul. His life force, his strength, his very essence poured into her, filling the space that had once felt so empty. When he pulled back, he looked at her with reverence. A beautiful, intricate mark now glowed on her skin, a swirling silver pattern like a miniature galaxy. It was his sigil, the mark of the royal wolf, intertwined with a soft golden light that was uniquely hers. He then offered her his own neck. It was her turn. She hesitated for a moment. She had no fangs, no wolf to guide the ritual, but Kaloran only smiled, his trust in her absolute. "You do not need them," he murmured. "Just be you." She leaned in and pressed her lips to the space just below his jaw. She focused all her love, all her harmonizing energy into that single point. She felt a surge of her own power, golden and warm, flowing from her into him. When she pulled away, a matching mark glowed on his skin, a golden spiral of light intertwined with the silver of his wolf. Their bond was complete. Two halves made whole. They stood in the moonlight, two souls bound as one, the undisputed king and queen of a kingdom reborn. The formal marking of their union sent ripples throughout the kingdom. It was a powerful message. The age of valuing only brute strength was over. The new era would be one of balance, of power tempered by compassion, of strength guided by empathy. Kaloran and Irenia began to rule as true partners. While he handled matters of state, strategy, and law, she became the heart of the court. She established councils where omegas and betas, whose voices had long been ignored, could bring their concerns directly to the throne. She used her unique ability to soothe disputes between rival packs, her calming presence often de-escalating tensions before they could erupt into violence. Packs that had once been on the brink of rebellion now swore fealty with a renewed sense of hope. They saw a king who was not just a feared warrior, but a wise ruler guided by a queen whose strength was of the spirit. The story of how the wolfless Omega had saved the cursed king became a legend, a tale told at every hearth to teach pups that true power came in many forms. Irenia's own family became her staunchest allies. Her father, Dravenor, implemented reforms in his own pack, promoting a culture of greater respect for all ranks. Kerith, humbled and changed by her experience, became a frequent visitor to the fortress, acting as an ambassador for her sister and helping to bridge the gap between the old ways and the new. She and Irenia rebuilt their sisterly bond, forging it into something stronger and more honest than it had ever been. The fortress itself transformed. The cold, silent halls were now often filled with the sounds of discussion and, even, on rare occasions, laughter. Irenia had plants and tapestries brought in, breathing life and color into the stone and shadow. It was no longer a prison for a lonely king, but a true home, a beacon of hope for the entire realm. Kaloran watched the transformation with a deep sense of contentment. He had spent a decade isolated by his pain, believing his sole purpose was to contain the monster within. Irenia had not just freed him from his curse, she had freed him from himself. She had shown him how to be a king not just of wolves, but of people. Their love was the catalyst for it all. It was the quiet, unshakable center around which their new world turned. They were more than just rulers. They were a symbol of a healed kingdom, a testament to the idea that the greatest strength is found in embracing the very things the world perceives as weakness. The kingdom was not just stable, it was beginning to thrive. 1 year later, the first true day of spring arrived in the Dragon's Tooth Mountains, a rare and precious gift. The sun, warm and golden, melted the last of the snow from the fortress's highest peaks, and the air was filled with the sweet scent of new life. On the same balcony where they had sealed their bond, Kaloran stood with his arm wrapped around Irenia. She leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder, a soft smile on her face. Her hand rested protectively on the gentle swell of her belly. The kingdom was at peace. Lord Morvethis was a distant memory, his name a byword for treason and folly. The alliance with the Sunstone Pack had been renegotiated, built this time on mutual respect and trade, not a loveless marriage. The societal changes Irenia had championed had taken root, creating a more just and compassionate world for all wolves. "He's kicking," Irenia murmured, her smile widening as she felt the flutter of life within her. Kaloran placed his hand over hers, his own expression one of profound, quiet awe. The royal healers had been stunned. A wolfless omega, they had whispered, could not bear the child of a royal alpha. It was impossible. Yet, here was another miracle, growing strong and healthy, a symbol of their impossible love. "He will have your strength," Kaloran said softly, pressing a kiss to her hair. "And he will have your heart," she replied, turning to look up at him. The love that passed between them was a comfortable, lived-in thing now, as steady and enduring as the mountains around them. Their child would not be defined by the strength of their wolf alone. They would be raised in a kingdom that understood the value of empathy, of quiet courage, of the unique gifts each individual possessed. They would be the heir to a new world, one their parents had built together. Kaloran looked out at his peaceful, thriving kingdom, then down at his mate, his queen, the woman who had saved him in every way a person could be saved. The broken Omega, for whom no one had spoken, was now the voice of their future. The feared Alpha King, once lost to his own darkness, was now a beloved ruler, guided by her light. Together they watched the sun climb higher in the sky, illuminating a world full of promise. Their story was not just a legend of a king and his queen. It was the dawn of a new age, born from the courage of one who dared to love a monster, and the strength of one who found his salvation in being loved.